I I recognize my privilege, and this is, I think, important in the world we live in, where inequality is so great. It is important to recognize that I got to where I am because of a lot of the privilege of my upbringing. Now, what most people see when they look at me is that I grew up in a wealthy country, and so I was not challenged as many people in the world are. And I am white, and therefore I didn't suffer racial discrimination in the way that many people in the world do. And I am male, and therefore I didn't suffer gender discrimination in the way that many people do. What people don't recognize is the two pieces of privilege that I value the most are not any of those three. I recognize the privilege I've got from those three, but the two pieces of privilege I recognize the most are different. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about these two extra pieces of privilege. And I will mention briefly what they are. One is that I was born into a family that wasn't, by the standards of my community, was not wealthy, but it was educated. And so from a very young age, I was exposed to games and puzzles and mathematical thinking from when I was extremely young. I was playing on a computer by the age 5. I was programming my own games by the age 10. And I was stimulated from birth almost with mathematical language, mathematical thinking. And I'll dig into a bit more why that is such an incredible privilege, which has led to a lot of my benefits that I've received as a mathematician in life. And the second privilege, which I value more than any of the other privileges, is that I had the privilege of growing up in Niger, in West Africa, from age 11 to age 18. And that gave me a perspective on the world, which was very, very different. In particular, that exposed me to a society and a culture which was much more collaborative and community focused than the individualistic culture of my birth. And so those are the two big privileges that I hold with me, and that I hope actually are more widespread than maybe the other privileges can be, and can maybe give us learning as to how we can think about teaching mathematics differently, how we can think about the learning of mathematics being different. And in particular, I'm going to focus on how my awareness of these additional privileges has led me to be an observer, and how I have learned from Ghanaian, Kenyan, Ethiopian teachers. I have learned from many other educators all over the world, but this story is really about what I've learned from specific teachers in Kenya, Ghana, and Ethiopia. So I only have 6 slides. I appreciate the fact that because we're a relatively small group, it would be great to interact more and for us to dig in to things which people want to discuss more. So I'm really happy to have questions in the chat, to have people raise their hand or in the room, speak out, and to actually interact on this. And I've deliberately only got a few slides so that there could be lots of time for interactions within this presentation. I have to warn you, I can talk forever. So if you don't interrupt me, then there is a risk I'll just carry on talking. But I'd love to have this as a more interactive session. Given that we're a relatively small group, I think it'll be much more valuable that way. So please don't hesitate to ask questions, interact, and ask for clarifications, whatever you'd want. I'm going to start with some of these insights that I have from African teachers. I should clarify that I'm not a teacher myself by training. I'm a university lecturer. My interactions with African teachers came initially through teacher training, that I got sucked in through some of my master's students, my postgraduate students who were teachers, into teacher training because they felt the way that I was lecturing differently was the sort of things that they needed to bring in to their teacher education. I since got very involved in teacher training, in working directly with school students. But all of this came through interactions, really, with African teachers from across the continent. And I'm going to start in Kenya because in many ways that's where my experience with high school education and primary school education and even early years really started. And one of the big lessons that I learned in Kenya was that in many contexts that I'd grown up in, you expected the systems to support you. And if you did good work, you expected the systems to support. But this wasn't the reality for many of the really good teachers that I interacted with. The person who got me most involved in high school education was getting a lot of recognition for the value of his work. He was working, supporting other teachers in many other schools. He was doing innovative things in all sorts of places, in all sorts of ways. And I took him aside at one day and said, you know, the work you're doing with other people is just so impressive. But I'm not really seeing what you're doing in your school, in your context. And he said, yes, that's really difficult. Many of my colleagues are jealous of me. They're jealous of the opportunities that I get. And so I get given all these other administrative tasks and everything else to drag me down. And what was so impressive is before that moment, I hadn't recognized that. I hadn't known this. Eventually, we found ways to support him and to create other opportunities. But he was impressive despite the system, not because of it. And this was one of the most important lessons that I learned, that inspiring people who are doing incredible work, they can do it whatever system you put them in. Yes, a good system can support them and elevate them. And that's what we hope for, and that's what we desire. But the most impressive people I've had the privilege of working with across the continent, they are doing amazing things, irrespective of the systems within which they're working. Sometimes they can do those things themselves and what they're doing. Sometimes that is oppressed, but they do it in interactions and inspiration for others. So that is one of the big lessons that I learned observing and watching my colleague, who was a Kenyan teacher at the time, working in a really difficult environment, but going over and above because he recognized it wasn't about just where he was then. It wasn't just about what he was doing. The need was more important than him as an individual. And I suppose this is something which then, when I visited Ethiopia quite regularly, I observed even more then. Because in Ethiopia, unlike in Kenya, educators were not as valued in terms of the financial remuneration and other remunerations that they were getting at the time. But they were dedicated. And this was as a community, they were dedicated. And actually, what was so interesting there is that the system was not supporting them financially, but it was supporting them as a community to grow, to help, to engage with one another. It was trying to bring in latest technologies, latest mechanisms, latest pedagogies into their teaching. And one of the things that we had there, which I was so inspired by, is we gave a maths camp. And there were teachers at the maths camp who we had interactions with through the course of the week. And at some point in the middle of the week, these teachers came to us and they said, you know, we really appreciate this camp because we finally understand what the government wants us to do. He said, what do you mean? Well, we've been going to all these trainings about student-centered learning and about how you really need to sort of put the learners at the center of education, but we had no idea what that meant. And so we weren't able to really do it until now. Now we've experienced, we've seen, we've felt what student-centered learning is by observing it for ourselves, by being part of it in these activities. And so we understand it. Now, within the system, we can maybe go back and we can try this and try elements of this ourselves. And the deep learning and the deep that I took from that is that there's a lot of effort at political level, global levels, to actually get curriculum change or systems change, which which people can then build good education systems from. But unless on the ground people understand what those ideas mean, how they can work for them, and have that experience themselves, if they've just been taught in ways which don't include this, if they've never experienced that, you're not going to be able to implement those systems in the way which are needed. And so, as well as these reforms at the top, at the political level, there needs to be grassroots initiative, exposing people, engaging people, building communities of people that understand, that believe in what's happening. And I think with transformations which have happened in education systems in all across the continent, there's elements of this where this grassroots movement is needed. And finally, I want to come to Ghana, where over 10 years ago now, I'm getting old, over 10 years ago now, I had the privilege of giving a teacher training session in Ghana with AIMS. And in fact, I believe, and I don't think there's anyone here to contradict me, I believe this was AIMS Ghana's first teacher training session. So where you are now part of something which is well established and which is going on and which is really impressive. This was a small workshop, but the very first one that AIMS Ghana gave over 10 years ago. And this training, we had a professor from the US, Eric Hamilton, who came in, and I was there, and I was one of the key facilitators, and I brought in my colleague from Kenya to help me co-facilitate. And we gave a training session in a way I've never done, and I've never had the opportunity to do again. We hadn't done this before, and we haven't done this since, but it was so powerful. We were aiming to bring technology in, and on the first day, we had a session with the teachers. And we showed them the sort of technologies that we were using. We showed them what we were expecting and how this was going to lead to the sort of learning. On the second day, we went into a school, and the teachers on the first day said, "No, we're not ready. We're not ready. We can't go to the school yet. We don't know what we're doing. We don't understand this well enough. We need more time." And we said, "No, don't worry, don't worry. Tomorrow we're going to teach the session. You just sit there with the teachers, with the students. You just sort of watch what they do and observe. And if they interact, you can interact with them, but you're not expected to teach them." And so they accepted. And we went into the school, and the teacher sat next to the students, and the students every now and then looked across to them and said, "Is this okay? Can we do it like this?" And the teacher said yes. And they didn't know what they were talking about, so they just said, "Yes, go ahead, try, just try." And the students did really well. On the second day, we gave the session in combination with the teachers. We sort of did half and they did half. And on the third day, we went into a third school and they taught it themselves. And on the final day, the sort of final day of the week, the Friday, we'd now had 3 days in schools, in different schools. We then reflected. And one of the teachers gave an incredible reflection. She said, "You know, on the first day, it was incredibly powerful because I didn't know how to help the students, but I didn't lose authority. They asked me and I said yes, and so they still had authority over them, and I learned from observing them." And in fact, one of the conclusions that came out was actually the students learned better on the first day than they did the third day. And the observation of this was that actually the teachers, once they knew more, they tried to teach the students what they knew. Whereas on the first day, they allowed the students to explore, and they observed what they did, and they learned from what they did. And this is the essence of that facilitator role that teachers can play, which can be so powerful in education. And one of the things which came out, and which was a deep learning for me on this, is that I've always valued knowledge. I've loved acquiring knowledge for myself. I loved, learning more and more. But knowing more does not imply you do it better. And in fact, for me personally, this was one of the deep learnings which led me to then step back and to allow others to step in. Because although I knew more than them, that did not mean I would do better. I had more experience. I could pick things up that they might miss. But enabling people to grow and to lead was so important. And this is something which the maths camps, which I mentioned before, have grown and have emerged in this principle of enabling others to step up and lead and learn from that. And everybody is learning together. And if somebody knows enough that they're no longer learning much, they should no longer be there. And this is something which is so powerful. The power of actually learning while you're teaching, of recognizing that you don't know everything, and being accepting that you can present that. Broadly, it has helped me to recognize how little I know. I may know more than many, but that there's so much out there I don't know. And it's not just me. The key point is, and one of the key learnings that I've got from these teachers is it's okay. Just because I have more to learn doesn't mean I can't do things well. And that's a really, really powerful learning that I took away from these Ghanaian teachers who were brave enough to go into the schools not knowing and did a better job than when they did know. It was a really powerful experience. So, at the heart of all this, what do I want to take away? I want to take away the fact that, broadly to me, good education is about people. And it's about agents of change, you as teachers, as educators. You are the people who can make change happen. And meaningful change can happen in unexpected places, like people like yourselves working together. The collaboration is key. And this has come from my privilege of growing up and living in a variety of African contexts in East and West Africa. I'm going to come out. And before I jump into the next topic, I'm open to questions. Are there any questions? Would anyone like to come in with a comment or a question about this first section, where I believe that real meaningful change is not going to emerge from high resource environments where people are very in systems which support them. It's going to emerge from environments which are challenging and where impressive individuals don't know everything, but they're willing to learn and they're willing to engage together collaboratively in learning and doing better. That's the message I'd like people to take from this first section. Any questions before I go on to the next thing? What are some of the technologies I use in teaching? Oh, that's a good question. I've used everything and anything. Of course, I've used digital technologies. That's at the heart of a lot of what we do. We use mobile phones now more than computers, although both are useful in different contexts and different ways. We've used non-digital technologies. And one of my most enjoyable moments was at a maths camp where we had 5 different themes that were taught in the maths camp. 4 of those themes used and integrated technology and computers in a really powerful way. One theme did not. The theme that did not was programming and coding, a theme which everybody else, of course, teaches on computers. And yet this was taught using physical exercises, using interactions with people. These are very important things. Some examples that we can use in Ghana which are practical. And this is something where I could go through and give a whole lecture on different examples, different instances, different technologies that have been used. But I think you've actually got colleagues there in this room. I think Francis Togbo is here at GUIDEMS. And they've been doing this, and they've been using these technologies, and they're investigating them to see what works in the Ghanaian context. I can't give you silver bullet solutions. If you're looking for the answer, that's hard. What I do recommend is things that are open. You know, commercial. There are some very good commercial tech solutions, but I don't believe they are adapted or adaptable to low resource environments. And so that's something I will come back to, and I'll talk later about with the technology and inequality. So I'll come back to some of these. I really like this message. Some people are not ready to unlearn and relearn, and they're very resistant to change. Now, this is a really important thing. And I must admit, 10 years ago, I'd have been more gung-ho about this. The reality is, actually, such people can be extremely valuable and useful. They can help slow us down. There's actually the fact that not everyone is ready to try and be brave and change can be a very useful thing, because the reality is, although change can be done well in individual contexts at individual moments, doing it at scale is very tricky. And so going from individual observations to doing it at scale, doing that too quickly can actually have negative effects. So don't be too negative about the people who slow things down. It's frustrating. There's nothing more frustrating than actually having people. I had a whole container of computers that could have been brought to the university that was actually being, when I was working in Kenya, that was not able to come in because of corruption, because people weren't getting a cut because there was no money. And so basically they never came. What I then found out later was actually when we eventually did get computers in, they had a negative effect. Because when we didn't have computers, students were finding their own way to access technology, and it was empowering them. And once the computers were there in the lab was locked and they didn't have access. But the students felt that they should have access, so they weren't finding their own solutions. So it was very strange, and it was very interesting that blocking actually led to deeper learning. So it is frustrating that you will have to work with people who will block you for good reasons and for bad. Appreciate it. Appreciate the learning you can have. It's always hard, but that's what I really recommend. There's a question in the room, it seems. Shall I hand over to the room?
Okay, David, you were talking about people who believe that they have more to learn for that matter. They cannot cause a change in sight. I just want to find out, what do you think is the main reason why they think that way? And what are the other ways they can overcome that challenges?
So I'm not sure. Could someone repeat the question that was a bit closer to the mic?
The question is, you said that some people think that they have more to learn. For that matter, the fear of changing the society is a bit problem. And I'm asking, what do you think that it causes that fear? And what are some of the ways that we can overcome that?
Oh, what a good question. I tell you, I would much rather that the person trying to change society, trying to bring change, has a bit of fear. Because the truth is, we don't know. There's so much which is unknown. We don't know the full set of consequences that are going to come. I would rather that someone has the fear and is brave enough to overcome it than someone who is overconfident and doesn't have the fear. And recognizing that you have more to learn is maybe, to me, that's the sign of a good education. I have to recognize that I'm privileged. I feel I was privileged and went through a very good education. And at the end of my education, once I had my PhD, I realized I knew almost nothing because there was so much out there that I didn't know. And since then, I've done nothing but learn all the time. And I now realize there's even more that I don't know. Actually, good learning doesn't actually get you to a position where you know. Good learning gets you to the position where there are things that you know and things that you believe and things that you understand. But there's other things that you know you don't yet know. You could learn if you had the time. I am aware of more things that I have not yet learned than I am things that I have learned. And that's a really powerful position to be in. if you are aware of your own ignorance, then, and as I feel that I am now, not all of my ignorance, there are some bits of ignorance that I'm not yet aware of, but I am aware that there are many things that I am as of yet ignorant about, but I could learn about them if I put in the time and the effort. And it's a question of choice of where my effort goes. So my encouragement to you is, if you do feel that fear, and you see others going ahead without fear, don't assume that they know more than you. Maybe you can go ahead with that confidence, but recognizing that with your fear, maybe you don't yet know enough yet. Maybe you have more to learn. And if there's an opportunity to do so, you could seize it. And therefore, I think you will do better. You will learn more, and you will be able to engage in that process. Have confidence in what you do know, and believe that it's enough to be useful, because that is almost always the case. And that's all that's needed. This is my learning, particularly from the Ghanaian context, is those teachers that knew very little on that second day when they went into the first school, they knew enough to be useful. They knew very little, but they knew enough to be useful. By the fourth day, the third school, they knew more, and they were less useful because they were trying to impart their knowledge rather than facilitate student learning and gain knowledge alongside. Now, these are different, they're difficult things. There's no single way. For some students, you need one thing. For some students, you need another. Even for one topic or a different topic, the same thing doesn't work. Teaching is one of the most challenging, I was going to say career, but it's not. It's a lifestyle choice. Being an educator is something you choose. It becomes who you are. And it is one of the most challenging things and most rewarding in many ways lifestyle choices I know. And so my encouragement to you is to recognize that fear you might feel. Do I know what I'm doing? You need to quash it, not to get rid of it, but to say, I know enough to be useful. And I believe that all of you do. And this is something actually we'll get onto in maybe the next bit. If there's not another question, actually, I think that's a good segue into my next piece about mathematics potential. Because actually there's some very interesting research which is coming out about this. I'm going to go from the top down. Many people recognize that in the digital world that we live in, strong maths opens you up to the jobs of the future, be they in tech, in finance, in science. Good maths is really at the heart of this. And I'm sure as mathematics teachers, you're aware of this. Opportunities come to those who have good math skills. The US has some very interesting research on this. And basically what they find is that the people who come out of school, the end of high school in the US, with the best math scores, the highest single indicator of what gets them there is how they came in to early childhood education. So if you have these long-term studies, which they now have, the biggest single indicator of doing well at the end of school is, well, how good were you before you started primary school? I mean, this is insane. This means, you as teachers, all the effort you're putting in, which is so important, and don't get me wrong, is really important, is less important in those first years of learning. And this, to me, this sort of result, I don't think this holds everywhere. But this holds in the US at the moment. This has been, and this isn't to say that the levels of education weren't doing good things, but on a societal level, at the scale at which they did these studies, that in the US was what they found. And this is really powerful because, of course, there are confounding factors, but it does mean that we can look back and say, well, what are things that we can do? And what are ways where, if you want to think as a country, that countries like Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, I think we've got in the room, how is it that they could actually overtake, high resource environments like the US? because the US is doing really badly on its STEM results. You know, how is it that you could actually overtake, and you could have the scientists, the all the skills coming out of your societies and overtaking without having the finance that goes in? The finance that goes in high resource environments is insane. You can't compete with that. And there's good evidence coming out of, I think it's Botswana, that has put more money into education than European countries, but the outcomes are not as good. And so it's not about the money. So what is it about? Well, part of what I believe, and part of what the evidence seems to be pointing towards on these long-term studies. Now, these long-term studies only exist in high resource environments like the US, where they can afford to do 20-year studies. I mean, has anyone heard of a 20-year research study in Ghana? It's not, these sort of things aren't happening yet. They're expensive. But where they are happening, what seems to be coming out is that the skills you come in with as a young child are what determine the skills you're going to leave with all those years later. And what influences that? Well, there's other studies that look into this. And the main thing is that it's your caregivers. It's how the adults who look after you interact with you. And this is where I come to my great privilege. When I was young, my family played games with me. They did puzzles with me when I was very young. I still remember a wooden puzzle that we had where we had to build a pyramid from these pieces. And I loved that puzzle. And it was so stimulating. I wanted to find out how many different ways could I build the pyramid with these different pieces. You know, a very simple thing. But it doesn't really matter what that puzzle is or what those games are that you play. That stimulation, the use of numbers, the use of counting. My daughter, when she was a bit younger, age 2, she didn't like to eat very much. And my father, her grandfather, sometimes at meal times, she would play a game with him that she would not take a bite unless he gave her a sum and she could answer the sum. Age 2. You know, age 2, she was stimulated by numbers in a really constructive way. That's the family environment which leads to this early entry performance, which has been shown to lead to good performance on average at the exit of school. So really what we're talking about is talking to children from a very young age about number, about color, about shape, about posing problems, solving problems, thinking, anything which stimulates the mind to think. If we do that with children at very early age, it is known that this will have positive outcomes right the way through their education. And these are really simple things. I think in the room we have at least one member of GuideMs who is now in touch with this charity in the US, Early Family Maths, who's trying to build an app to help parents to have playgroups which have this interaction, this mathematical interaction. By all means, I believe Francis and Carl are both here who are part of GuideMs. And approach them, get involved. If you have kids who are younger than 7, then, or even if they're not your kids, they're your nephews, they're your nieces, they're your neighbors. You know, this is something where the best gift you can possibly give them is to play with them or to get their caregivers to play with them. And that has been shown is likely to be the thing which will give them these opportunities later in life. I feel very passionately about this. And one of the things which is so important, which this team in the US who have this charity, Early Family Math, one of the things which is so important there is that, again, the evidence is, you know, as the caregivers, you don't need to know anything more than being able to count to 100, say. If you can count to 100, yeah, if you know about colors and shapes, for early childhood, that's all you need. You just need to know to interact with children in this way. and they will thrive and they will grow. And it doesn't matter what happens later on, it seems, ups and downs, good schools, bad schools, they will navigate their way if they've got that foundation. Not all of them, but on average, they will do better. And that's something which is so powerful. This does not diminish from the importance of good schools, of good teaching later on. But it does say, if you want to help those around you who have children less than 7, play with their kids. Talk to them about numbers, about colors, about shapes. That's all that's needed. Are there any questions about this? Because this is so important to me as a topic. I have been privileged all my life that I've always been good at maths. And many people say, oh, you were born with it. I don't believe that's true. I believe that the real differentiating factor is I engaged with it when I was young. And that then stayed with me all the way through. Before I go on to the next piece about technology and inequality, any questions or comments about at this point? I need to get the chat up.
About your point on the entry in the content.
So I'm not hearing well. Can you come closer to the mic?
Yes. So my question is, I think what I want you to elaborate more is the math performance influenced by entry. So does this mean that we need to make sure we have like math incorporated into, like, what does it really mean in this case? Because my mind is all over the place on that.
Absolutely. Well, the simple truth is nobody knows. And the answer to your question is there are researchers who have come out with this evidence in the US for the US context. I should be very clear here. I haven't even seen this evidence in the UK because I've not seen any similar studies. But in the US, there is a real problem with science and maths education in general. And one of the things that they then did is they then did a long-term analysis to try and understand this. And they found that the biggest single indicator of how well people did at the end of schooling was how well they did before they went into school. Now, of course, there's lots of confounding effects. The people who did well going into schools were those who, like myself, had educated parents who talked to them about maths, mathematical ideas, and so on, and stimulated when they were young. And they presumably carried on doing that right the way through their schooling career. So there's many confounding effects. But the thing, so I'm not saying that this should be taken as this is what we need to do. There are no silver bullet solutions. But what I do believe this does is this gives real hope to me in low resource environments. If we can create cultures where young kids are brought up in stimulating environments where mathematical concepts are part of the language which people talk to them in, they are part of the games that they play, and they're encouraged to play those games, then the current research suggests that will give them a foundation which will enable them to do better through their schooling and come out with better performance. That's the hypothesis which is sort of emerging. And it's a hypothesis. It needs to be tested. And in my mind, it should be tested at community levels. We should be looking at sort of ways in which communities of parents and caregivers are together trying to provide that stimulating environment for children. And there's a whole set of groups trying to do this. The Lego Foundation is all about supporting projects that support this playful learning, because this is what the current research evidence implies is so important in giving children anywhere a good start in life and their mathematical education. So that's all I can really say about this, that this is what is being recognized, not in all circles, but in many circles, as being extremely important.
Thank you.
David, there's another question.
Great.
So we are talking about opportunities in mathematics, and everyone is talking about STEM. from the slides, you were talking about strong maths opens up all STEM field. But assuming a student is good in maths, but the math is not strong, and he still wants to venture into the STEM field, is there a way we can push that child? Or so far as his math background is not good, it will be very difficult for him to venture into that field?
This is a really good question. And, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And I quite like STEAM, which adds arts to that. But there is, and some people have tried to put coding at the heart of this. And I learned to code. I was coding age 10. I was writing my own games. Fundamentally, I would argue that mathematical thinking is what's needed to do good coding. Good mathematics does not mean being good at doing the mathematics in the curriculum. I should be clear on that. To me, it's about problem solving. It's about mathematical thinking, logic, abstraction. These are the core to real mathematics. And I would argue that all STEM is based on those principles. And if you don't have that foundation, you are always going to struggle. So I'm not talking about the fact that now, if you're in secondary school and you have someone who isn't good at math, that you shouldn't encourage them to go into science fields. No. What I'm saying is, if you're starting at early childhood, at this particular point in this mathematics potential, what I'm saying is, if you start in early childhood and you give children these abilities, these simple mathematical language and abilities, it will help them become good at all the STEM fields and STEM as a whole. That's what that is what I am sort of claiming. So I'm not saying that you should discourage people who are not good at math at a given point in time to pursue STEM. Let me put that into perspective. IDEMS is an organization where mathematical sciences is in the title. We've recently taken on a third director who has an English background, a language background. The needs, and actually her thinking is extremely mathematical, but she hasn't studied mathematics, but she has got that logical thinking, and it's come from a very different place. But that's what matters. It is that thinking, that capability of thinking mathematically, rather than being good at the subject of mathematics, which counts. Any other questions or comments? And I should just also qualify what I've just said. Of course, being good at the subject of mathematics is, in Kenya, from a student who did some analysis of this, this is necessary to get to university. People who failed mathematics did not make it to university. I think there was a similar study in Ghana at some point where it was the transition from junior high to senior high. And those who were not good at maths didn't make it to senior high in the same proportions. And there were sort of issues around this as well. But in Kenya, it was very strong, and it was about mathematics. If you weren't good at math, you didn't have the grades to get to university. And so these are things where mathematics as a subject is important to enable people to progress through the systems as they're set up. But mathematical thinking as a concept is the foundation of most scientific subjects and so on. So that's a sort of slightly different thing.
David, there are a few more questions in the chat.
Oh, sorry, the chat. I've missed the chat. Thank you. Let me get the chat back up. Oh, 5 questions in the chat. What are some games you can play with a 2-year-old child? Oh, that's so much fun. There's so many and there's so few. As I said, my daughter, when she was 2, she just loved, doing simple sums and counting and things. And actually she got so good at it as a 2-year-old that she was able to, in her head, I had a math friend who came once and was sitting for lunch, and she played the same game with him. And he said, okay, what's 1 + 2 + 3? And she immediately, without saying anything, said 6. And he said, okay, 1 + 2 + 3 + 4. Okay, 10. And she went on till about sort of, getting up to adding this. And then eventually said, these are just step numbers. They're easy. And so, you know, she actually had this sort of concept of what type of the numbers were and so on. You can go amazingly far with a 2-year-old just playing simple games, you know. And the thing with a 2-year-old is you can just do repetition. They love to repeat the same sort of things. They don't need to be different all the time. And what they learn as a 2-year-old, they will forget. You know, so, you know, my daughter can no longer do the same mental arithmetic she could do as a 2-year-old now that she's 7. It's very interesting. And she's actually frustrated sometimes that she can't. But the underlying understanding that she's gained and what that means she can do now as a 7-year-old, it makes a huge difference. So you can play any sort of games. You know, they can be very, very simple. It can literally just be about trying to find things which are the same color, the same shape. You know, it really, really simple stuff. I do recommend this early family maths as a group to look at their things. And if you get in touch with Francis, he could maybe put you on the waiting list to test out their new app when it comes out in about a month's time. And so, you know, there are lots and lots of opportunities there, all freely available. You don't need much. There are people who actually, if you do buy games, there are games you can buy. I bought a game for my daughter when she was 2, and when my son was 2, he tried to play it and he didn't like it, but she loved it. And it was just where you have a rabbit and a few shapes, and you've got to make the shapes look like they look in the picture. You know, very, very simple things, but really powerful. Oh, how do you help a child in lower grades answering word problems? I don't have good answers to this except the following. If you can get it so that they enjoy it, they'll get good at it. At that lower grade element, it's about engaging them. The key is that if this is something where they feel it's work, they feel that they have to do it, they engage with it very differently mentally from if they're just doing it because they want to do it, because they have fun doing it. If you know, my 7-year-old daughter, very recently, we were in a long car journey, and you know, my son was saying, you know, how long is it going to be till we get there? And it was sort of 4 hours, 30 minutes or whatever it was. And he then said, what's that in seconds? And so my daughter said, okay, I'll figure it out. And she did. And, you know, it then doesn't matter. So you can take simple things. Sorry, excuse me. Very simple ideas. And you can get children to engage in ways that you really blow your mind that, wow, they can do that. And it's about the fact that if you ask them to do it, we then asked her the rest of the trip to do this all the time. And she had great fun. And then the next trip, she said, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So we leave it. It's about engaging them in something they want to do. You know, finding that whatever interests them at that point in time where it's fun. And that becomes then a skill which they then take in and they absorb. We've seen some challenges. What are opportunities for people who studied mathematics, apart from being a teacher in Africa, particularly in Ghana? Oh, what a great question. Again, I point you to the guidance people as sort of some of this in some sense. There is an interesting issue here. And I must tell you a story of when we went with a professor from Oxford. I went to visit some serious bankers in Nairobi in Kenya. And we had a discussion with them and we said, you know, okay, well, who do you employ? Oh, well, first we'd employ mathematicians, then, you know, engineers, physicists. And then after that, we might consider someone who's done a finance degree. And we said, well, that's great. Why is it the Kenyan universities don't know this? And they said, oh, no, that's not from Kenyan universities. The reality is, and this is something which is so important, and this is something where you as teachers, you know, have to recognize the value that you can bring. The truth behind that statement, which I understood because I spent 6 times at a Kenyan university, is that the maths that was being taught in the Kenyan university wasn't leading to what I would call deep mathematical thinking. It was leading to mathematical knowledge. And mathematical knowledge is not what was valued by the banks and by other industries. It is the mathematical thinking that was valued. The ability to be able to think mathematically and to be able to engage in whatever problem you do. We as an organization, IDEMS tends to employ PhD mathematicians and then gets them to work on problems which have nothing to do with their mathematical topic. But it is the skills they've learnt in reasoning, in logic, which allow them to now excel at whatever tasks they get given. That's the skills we need to be teaching people through the mathematical learning. It isn't about being able to necessarily do a particular calculation. You know, it's about being able to understand, well, when can you take a shortcut to do this more easily? If you're multiplying by 9, you could just multiply by 10 and then take 1 off. You know, that sort of mental agility is what people are looking for, not the knowledge of mathematical practices, mathematical language. And that distinction is a really tricky one. Yes, I really appreciate STEAM, and I think I mentioned this before, and the difference, you know, once you bring in art and thinking about that, the value that that brings. The truth is that actually, you know, why is it that we are putting such an effort on STEAM and things? Actually, all education is valuable. All education is useful. The problem is that in certain parts of the world, and I'm going to point to Tanzania, actually STEM and STEAM, where STEM got devalued in favor of the arts. So in Tanzania, you have a 6-to-1 unbalance of arts teachers to science teachers. And this is leading to a generational problem in the education systems where there's not the balance of people coming through. Right? Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia don't have these same problems, fortunately. But this is an artifact in Tanzania, which has come from educational policy in certain ways, where the art subjects actually took a lot of prominence. And this is sort of something where it's been recognized, and I've been involved in projects where they're trying to redress this balance because of the importance of the scientific subjects. Now, I want to be clear that in my view, scientific subjects are not better or more useful than art subjects at all. It is that breadth, these different sort of elements. You know, when you look at real deep mathematics, it's creative. How do you learn creativity? Well, actually, it's often the art subjects which help you to embrace that creative side, which is needed in deep mathematics and in other sciences. So these two things are not in competition with one another. One of the best mathematicians I know, she's a musician, and she's now a professor at Caltech. But she also does sort of plays in concerts in music. So the combination of these two things, you know, the arts and the sciences, is often very intertwined, and hence the importance of STEAM. And how do you make students think mathematically? Oh, what a difficult question. I don't have the real answer to that, except that when you don't make it fearful, when you make it playful, what you find, and this is the experience, even at secondary level, when we have these maths camps, that playful learning, there is a way in which that mathematical thinking then becomes not just it was a Ghanaian student, a young girl. She must have been early years of junior high, who was at a maths camp. I think it was the first maths camp in Ghana, and I still remember her saying sort of of the overnight reflection. This is making me think hard. And this came as a surprise that to do maths, you had to think hard. Well, it was, of course, the maths she was doing was not the maths in school, because everything we do there was extracurricular. But it was this idea that when you do maths, you need to think hard, came as a surprise to her, is exactly what to me highlights. How do you get people to think mathematically? You get them to want to think, to enjoy thinking, to recognize the value, that it's not about getting the right answer. That's much less important than gaining the skills and building the muscles of thinking hard and how to think about getting an answer. And if you get a wrong answer, that's not bad. That's a learning opportunity. Actually, the wrong answer, you almost always learn more, you think more if you've got a wrong answer than if you happen to get the right answer by chance, but just doing it wrong or by looking somewhere else and getting it from somewhere else. That joy of thinking hard, that's part of what you need to encourage. You need to get people to see that thinking is valued and not getting the right answer. The right answer is much less important than the value of thinking and the enjoyment of thinking. Whew, there's loads of questions coming in. This is great. From your explanation, curriculum developers have to develop a curriculum for problem solving and mathematical thinking. And then, is mathematical thinking taught and how? There are curriculums for problem solving and mathematical thinking. You know, and there are people in this room whom I taught mathematical problem solving at Ames, you know, 10 years ago. So this is something which exists. It's been taught for many years. I was not the first person to teach it. Many people had taught it before me at Ames and elsewhere. And it's been taught at high schools and so on. So this is not new. And it does exist in certain curriculums. I would argue that it's not effective when it's put in at the curriculum level. This is exactly my learning from Ethiopia. You know, in Ethiopia, putting it in at the curriculum level, that would be an impressive system. But if on the ground in the implementation, people don't know and they don't feel and they don't enjoy problem solving and mathematical thinking, it won't come across to the kids. So no, what we need to do is we need to get teachers to engage with it, to think, to be exposed to it. And actually, AIMSEC in South Africa was really good at. Was it really good? Oh, is somebody wanting to speak? Okay, I'll carry on. But maybe you can mute, Wilson. Okay, thank you. So yes, I mean, it's sort of the thinking about mathematics. If that's something which teachers enjoy, they will spread that joy to the students they teach. And so this thinking mathematically and problem solving, this is maybe, if I was thinking about teacher training, you know, what I'd want to have is really to make sure that teachers spend time playing with fun puzzles and fun things, which they can then pass on. Play games, have fun yourselves. Because that joy of mathematics, that joy of thinking and mathematical thinking and problem solving, if you have it, you can share it. And that's really what we want. So why, please kindly share your materials with us. We do have open materials which are freely accessible and which can be shared. My recommendation is that through GuideMs, which is a local organization in Ghana, they can do more than just help you, but also share and help you to learn how to use them. The virtual maths camps are really aimed at secondary schools. The early family maths coming out of this charity in the US, you know, they're at preschools. There's coming out of Kenya and a group in Kenya called InnoDems. They do things like painting classrooms for early, you know, the primary years of education, to be able to get sort of playful activities in the sort of classrooms. And there's a whole range of different things. We're not the only people. There's lots and lots of people creating good resources. My recommendation is don't take one source, build a community, try different things amongst yourselves, share them, evaluate them amongst yourselves. It's about a community. Build a community, sharing these, engaging with them, finding ways to work together. Because that's what I've learned from my time in Africa, is it's all about community. And at the lower level, problem solving is quite difficult. I want to sort of, I want to pick up on this. And I'm conscious I'm sort of going through my time quite quickly, so I'm going to have to sort of speed up with the other pieces. But at the lower level, problem solving is not difficult because problem solving doesn't need to be made to be difficult. At the really low levels with very young children, they can be very happy solving the same problem time and time again. I mean, for me as a caregiver, it gets boring, but for them, it doesn't. And this is one of the things that actually understanding and having that patience, and I've seen really good early years educators do this, just day in, day out, week in, week out, have the same things that they're doing and where the young children are building up. Why did I leave Kenya? Well, I was in Kenya for 6 years at Maseno University, and then I left Kenya to go to Ghana. So I think you'll have to fight with your Ghanaian colleagues about whether I should have left Kenya or not. But actually now based in the UK, much of my work is in sub-Saharan Africa. And the key point is I can't be the person to help bring these changes. All I can do is support the people on the ground. In Kenya, I recommend INADEMS. This is a really powerful team trying to do these things. In Ghana, there is GUIDEMS. And so you asked if I left descendants. Well, I have my former students are setting up these organizations. They're building, they're driving these ideas forward. And they're doing it in their context with experiences that I don't have, having grown up with some of the challenges that the students are facing. So my job is really now to support. I'm fortunate to have had these experiences, to have learned from this. But it's not my job to sort of, I cannot be the one to bring changes in your communities, because communities have to be built from within. They can be stimulated from outside, but they need to be built from within. I'm going to carry on and try to get through the rest of the education, the rest of the presentation before we get to a final discussion. So thank you for the interruption with all these questions. It's made it much more exciting, much more interesting. I want to talk a little bit about technology and inequality, because one of the first questions that came up was, what technology do you use? And 10 years ago, giving this sort of presentation, I would have done nothing but share with you a whole list of open educational resources that anyone can access and that anyone can use, built from all over the place. And those still exist, and I could give you that list. But I've learned that actually they haven't yet had the impact that I was hoping in low resource environments. And the problem is that actually EdTech, in all its forms at the moment, the current evidence is it is driving inequality. And that means those who are in lower resource environments are almost always losing out compared to those who are in higher resource environments. In Utah, in the US, they have over 1,000 maths software to choose from at secondary school level, to the extent where the schools now ask advice from the sort of local government on which one should they use. And so the local government has set in place strict regulations where they can, if they want to get government subsidy to use a particular tool, then that tool has to have been tested in a sort of trial. And they have a format for that trial. It's quasi-experimental. And what they found is they've tested over 230, which meet their minimum criteria. And of those 230, only 10 of them have been shown to be actually effective on students learning at scale. So of these 1,000 different products which are out there, which are all commercial, almost all commercial, only 10 of them actually went through the more rigorous process to be found to be effective and to actually have positive effect. And of those 10, when they look at them, they're all different. They're doing different things. So I'm not saying there aren't good EdTech things to be done. And we could give you long lists of them and so on. Some of them are commercial, some of them are open. But the simple truth is, right now, there's there's a bewildering array of possibilities. Really, what's needed is these sorts of structures to be able to evaluate as communities what works for your communities, why, what engagement actually works in your context. And that is not something you can do as individuals. It's something really that there need to be structures which gradually get put in place. And in Utah, in the US, they have put these structures in place and they now have that recommended list. But that's for them. And that's because they have millions of dollars every year to help their schools use these software. And so they can afford to use these commercial software. There isn't the equivalent evidence base for open source, and there isn't the same bewildering array of open source solutions yet that I can say. There are good things that I can recommend. But what I believe is needed is a community of people who are going to be testing, using, building things which will be impactful in your environments with local partners. This is something we are trying to support, but it's not for us to do this. It's for the local partners. Again, I push you to the likes of GuideMs, the likes of InnoDems in Kenya, who are people who look to try and do this and maybe who can be part of building these communities, because that's what and it's needed. Because the progress, I can tell you 10 years ago for statistics at a high school level, the best product got bought out. It was commercial. It was the best in the world. There is still nothing which is as good as it to learn about data at a young age. But it got bought out, and therefore its development got cut short because it wasn't open source. So I believe that the progress has been slow, inconsistent. People think of this as being fast, and in many ways it is. But the reality is it's been very up and down, and the commercial routes are not working at scale in the environments I care about. And so I believe that you can be part of creating better technology to build the skills that you need, that work in your environment, that work with your constraints. And that's what I hope. And that's what I hope to be able to support. This is why I'm now where I am doing what I am. I'm the director of a social enterprise. We try to build tech. And we try to build tech that works in low resource environments. Because I believe we need a globalized world with tech-driven solutions and skills-based education, and these have to work together. But these have to be coming out of the environments that need them the most, not coming out of the US, the UK, where the actual current models aren't working at scale. Okay, let me come out and actually discuss about challenges to opportunity. Now, these challenges are not universal, but they are the sort of things that I've observed. You know, I have students, former students, who taught at universities where they had over 1,000 students with no assistance. You know, what is universal? And I'm sure you're all victims of the heavy workloads. I've not really come across a context where those workloads aren't heavy and where you are not confronted by resource limitations. Well, actually, in Kenya, there is one school where that was taken away, the M-Pesa Foundation Academy. Amazing school, where they got rid of the resource limitations. They still had the heavy workloads, but it was a very interesting experiment. But in most contexts on the continent, the resource limitations are there, there's heavy workloads, and there's quite often lots of students. So it's very difficult to divide your time amongst them. Well, I believe that the responses that I'm observing amongst people who are really, I think, impressive in the context is collaboration. Collaboration is key. People are setting up collaborations, they're working, they're sharing resources from one group to another. They're building in efficiency. I mean, my favorite example of this was actually a university in Kenya, which recently took up a technological innovation where it was designed to save the lecturers time. So it wasn't more work for the lecturers, it was saving them time. And it had positive outcomes on the learning. And then suddenly the educators got engaged because it was positive and it was saving them time. Then they were willing to invest more time into making it better and to be part of the innovation. So encouraging that innovation to come from them was powerful. And so what is this opportunity? The opportunity is to scale, is to get things happening, not at the individual level, but in communities. It's to get leadership from within. You have to be the ones creating your own. Don't ask me for solutions. I have input, I can support, but I shouldn't be the one giving solutions. They need to come from you. But the power of today is all about data. And if when you share, you can scale and you share that data, you can get joint learning, because that's what could be different. We could be building really effective solutions that work and change across environments, across contexts, based on the data. And I'll come back to that when I get to responsible AI. But first, I will go into the power of community, because this is central to all of it. Really, I mentioned about the fact that I was privileged to grow up in Niger in West Africa. And this is where I learned about community. And more than that, I learned about peace. And this is so ironic. I was in Mali just earlier this year. And, you know, Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, I suppose there are enough of you in West Africa to know that they're, you know, they are in turmoil at the moment in different ways. They have conflict with ECOWAS as a region. Their governments have been related to coups and so on. I learnt peace in that region. The Sahel region is one where I learnt about peace. And I was in Mali earlier this year talking to an American who had moved back to Mali. He was had been American for many generations, but he'd traced his ancestry back to Mali. And he moved back there. And he'd been in the American army. And then he moved back to Mali and he learnt about peace. He learned, and we discussed the irony of the fact that if you go to the American websites and they, you know, they classify Mali as a dangerous country, and yet that is where he learned about peace, because the culture and the collaboration was so powerful in how it was a very collaborative, community-based society. And it's the same thing that I observed, that I learned growing up, that it's not about individual gain and being individualistic, which is what is promoted in a lot of high resource environments. It's often about serving the community and being part of a vibrant community and supporting a community and gaining from a community, benefiting from the community. It's that give and take. I believe that these community aspects, if we actually have teachers collaborating to explore how innovation can happen and can support learning in their own environments, I believe that's how you could actually be transformative. And don't get me wrong, you have to, as individuals, focus on details yourself. But by being part of a community, your learnings on those details are shared with others. And this is something where this can lead to collaboration in really important ways. Open as a principle is so powerful in this, because that's a way that these collaborations can take shape and scale and achieve more and outcompete their commercial counterparts. And more, the joint learning that comes from shared data and results is just so powerful. This is where true learning happens in my mind. It's that collaborative learning which comes backwards and forwards, where you learn from one another and where you recognize that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. These are things which I learned from my experience and my time living in West Africa. What I think is so important is that these ideas are brought into how we build tech. We need to build tech that serves the community, serves the learners, and is able to do this. And I can tell you that the current tech solutions are not built in that way. This is what I would love to see change. And I believe it can, but I believe it's more likely to change in our environments which understand community and collaboration and the value of it. I notice I've got one more question. If there's any more questions now before I jump into machine learning. There's been the last question is putting through a few of these interactive sites you can use. Well, as I say, I could give you 1,000 of them. I no longer do that. Actually, the ones I would recommend now would all be open. They may not be the best, they may not be the flashiest, but they all have been built on open principles, and there are some good ones there. But I would argue that my emphasis is not about individual tools at this point, because there's so many tools out there. That competition for tools is not what I believe is needed. I think it's a collaboration of a community using tools. And what I would like to point out is, of course, that if the tools you're using are commercial, then really, and are not open, are not based on open technologies, then there are elements of the collaboration which are limited. You are limiting who can access them and why in different ways. And so these are things which are very difficult to deal with in different contexts. But I believe that open has been shown that it will outcompete over time. So I believe many of the commercial tools, I've seen them come and go. where open has actually ended to win over the longer term. So I have a feel, so I believe very strong in open source and open educational resources. Even if quite often they're not yet ready, they're not yet where they need to be. The work needs to go into them to get them and to make them really useful. But I want to finish, I suppose, with AI, because AI is on everybody's minds at the moment. You know, I've been called into universities to help them to say, well, how should we deal with AI now that it's coming in and we can't, you know, people are cheating on our questions. And the argument that I say is, well, if people can use AI to answer your questions, it's probably, you know, that's the tool they're going to have access to in the future. So it's not that they're cheating, it's that you've asked the wrong question. You need to rethink the education into what education could look like once AI is amongst the tools that people have access to. What version of AI? How is this going to affect us? We don't know. This is still in its infancy. You know, the hype around it is huge. The impact it is going to have on our lives is huge. But it often doesn't do what people think it can do. And the need for humans in the loop is immense. And for responsible AI, there was this wonderful uproar fairly recently. I think it came mostly from Nigeria, but I'm sure there were some Ghanaians who had a say in it as well, where words like delve were pointed out as sort of, this is a sign that this could be, you know, if you delve into something, that could be, oh no, you could be using AI. Whereas in Nigeria, people pointed out, this is sort of common language. We use language like this every day. And you know, I have a colleague who actually sort of, you know, had a piece of AI generated text, and then she said, can you make this sound less like it's using AI? And it removed all the words delve and things, exactly as was pointed out by these articles. This is discriminatory. This is really serious, and this is really bad. It is removing people's individuality in their language, the richness of the language. I mean, you know, my experience from both Ghana and Nigeria and places where the language is so much richer than you find in the US and the UK. You know, they actually use vocabulary in ways which are different and which enrich the language. And so to suddenly find that this is confused with AI generated text and sort of to make, you know, that people then react negatively to this is insane. And these are some of the dangers. So to use AI responsibly is a totally different case. And many of the tools, including some of the ones that are mentioned above, use forms of AI to be able to sort of determine which questions students should get and even what information teachers should get. And these tools are going to be nothing but improved over the next few years. I hope that the open tools doing this will gradually catch up and maybe even overtake some of the commercial ones, because the commercial ones, they are often not as good as people think. They claim to be amazing, but anything I've actually had the privilege of looking into to see what it actually does, you know, the algorithms underneath it, these are relatively simplistic, you know, AI algorithms, which are actually simple stuff, and they're not really clever. And so there's opportunities there, especially with open tools, to build over time tools which will outcompete any of those. But AI will be an incredible tool going forward to help both students and teachers in their interactions when they're using digital tools. And that's where I come back to this element that if you want to be responsible in this, patience is a virtue. These tools are in their infancy. Don't jump from one to the other. You know, yes, they will change. Yes, it's good to keep abreast of what's happening, what the trends are, but don't get caught up in the hype, because none of them right now are quite what they claim to be. And the simple truth there is that the great power they have is immense, but people don't know how to use it. And so the challenge of AI at the moment is, because it's in its infancy, it is wild and erratic. And this can do great harm, just as it can do great good. But in the years to come, if you're patient, these tools will be refined. A lot of the bad will be removed, I believe. And I hope, if we go down open routes, the focus will become on how this can help learning and teachers. Whereas there is fear at the moment, and there is a potential at the moment that actually what it could do is just help the rich enrich themselves and actually become exploitative. And understanding the difference between these two is really hard. And so patience can be a virtue, to really recognize that, yes, these are important things. There is a lot of money floating around in these areas right now. It is really exciting. They are going to make a difference. But that fine line between actually serving society and exploiting others in society is a difficult one. And if we want to be responsible in how we use AI, this is something I could go on for ages, actually digging into some of the detail on this. But I want to just throw out that that word of warning, that the claims are often, the potential is there. The delivery is in its infancy, and it often is not what it yet says it could be. And I will finish with the final example of that, which I love. Very recently, Amazon had to close down its AI-based walk-in, walk-out stores, because it was shown that actually the AI algorithms that they had claimed were going to be monitoring you to be able to determine what you'd bought were actually thousands and thousands of workers in India who were just watching the videos, because the AI algorithms were not yet up to it. The problem was too hard. And that is where the reality, the idea of it is great, but the reality is the technology is not yet there in many of these cases. In theory, it will get there. And I believe in 100 years' time, the technology will be there. But nobody's thinking about 100 years when they're thinking about AI at the moment. Everybody's thinking about next week. And next week, the technology will not yet be where it needs to be for some of these things to really work. That's what I would like to finish with here. I'm conscious that we only have about 5 minutes left. I have, please, any mathematics software you would recommend for teaching mathematics? As I said, for high school level in the US, there's over 1,000. For me to recommend one above another would not be what I want to do today. What I can do is I can say that one of the groups I am working with that I believe has great potential is a group who are not at the forefront of this, but who are at the forefront of how to give feedback to students, which is meaningful and leads to deeper learning, which is one of the things that I think is critical. It's not the only thing. The really good softwares do bits of that and a lot of other things as well. But it is an element where it is open source, it's freely available. It's called Stack. And it's a group where I believe at what the little bit they're doing, they are at the forefront and ahead of all the commercial software, but they're only doing that one little piece. And what's needed in a school environment is a whole package. I can refer you to Utah, where they've done this analysis and they have on their website the 10 software that they recommend, but they're all commercial and they're expensive. They're all different, but they show you a whole set of tools which have evidence behind them that they're actually impactful in their context, not in yours, in their context, at improving mathematics learning. So I'm not going to actually do more than that. There's a few more questions, again, sharing mathematical websites. What I will do instead is share mathematical groups. I recommend in Ghana, GuideMs, in Kenya, InnoDems. These are groups who can build collaboration, who you can learn with, who if you have ideas, you can put it to them and they can help maybe put in place sort of little studies to try and test out and learn what works in your environment and how. Don't look for silver bullets. Build community. because that community will be able to test, trial, and learn together. That's my big advice. If you want to find me on LinkedIn as a good way to connect, you know, if you look for David Stern, I'm afraid there's a lot. I saw there's someone asked me to share an email. I suggest you connect through LinkedIn. You know, if you just put in David Stern, you probably won't find me. If you add IDEMS, you know, then you will. So David Stern IDEMS, I'll probably be the only one who comes up.
Okay, any questions from the online group and the in-person? Are we okay? Okay, David, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know you had to move things around, but thank you for making it and being here today. I think we learned a lot, and one thing that I'm very excited about is the collaboration part you talked about, which is something that we don't see mostly in our Ghanaian system. So I'm excited, and I think that the teachers here have learned a lot, and whatever you have said, you would see a great impact, and we would try to use this as part of everything that we do. Thank you so much, David.
Well, thank you so much, and I encourage you, as I've mentioned, you brought out the collaboration. My role would be to support. If this collaboration starts growing and it starts thriving, I think you'll find there will be ways I can support and I can help you on your journey. But that is the role that I can play, is one of support, and I look forward to hearing what happens next.
Okay.
All the
Thank
best.
you. Yeah. Let's say thank you to David. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Tradition in this place, we know each other, especially if I go into my quantum computer group, if you mention Comfort, oh, she's working on the printer algebra. Yeah, if everyone knows, so anytime when I started working in university, I was only looking for people who are working on the printer algebra, so that I could collaborate with them. Because you can't do everything. If you want to come up with, let's say, I think I was thinking of coming up with a math and saying, I can't do math and that. I will need to collaborate with teachers who are ready to teach in the program. Who are ready. I mean, it's not just some teachers that we are, I guess, having, and they are doing the same thing that they used to do in the classroom that they teach the students are struggling. We want to kind of make something that when a student is, even if the student is paying money for it, there should be a difference from the classroom, the extra work that we are doing. And so, like, we think about some of these things, like how to collaborate together. You could collaborate together and come up with an interesting workbook that makes things much easier for people to study. Interesting workbook, you still want to fall back on your curriculum, but you want to make it more, you see, David was talking about this critical thinking type question when he was trying to answer one part of this question, that it's not about someone who's bad, you have found someone who is very smart. You just need someone who can think. I wasn't the smartest, my class, sincerely, but I went to school the GSS and all the 8, 9, 10. That person, my kid sister was always fit. So every time she was like, you know, in the medical school, she was like the one that my parents high hopes. Some of us 8, 9, sometimes if it doesn't go well, we even go to 15 and so on and so forth. But then I realized that I am more of a thinker. Like I want to be able to get to the problem, think about the problem, try to. So I'm not the type that when you do mental math, I'm very good in math, but mental math, you beat me every day. And I will look like I'm very bad with this, right? So it's more of trying to still fall back on the curriculum, but try to make some of the problems a little bit relatable for everyone. Collaborations are good because their teachers are not researchers like me. I'm both teaching and research, so I went to research, we collaborated. But teachers who can think of something, come up with a nice, those who are doing the mathematicians who work with the computer scientists, come up with a software that makes something easy for the students to use outside of the classroom. So you go to the class, you teach the curriculum, and you give them homework and project the homework to something that forces them to use some of the tools that you are learning. It doesn't just make the students better, but it makes students teachers also better. This is me talking too much. Yeah. Okay. So I think that we have a break now. Yeah, let's go get some coffee and stretch because I'm going to ask when I get there, I'm going to ask you guys questions that David, you're going to summarize David's talk. And those online, I hope you can hear me. We are on break now, so stretch, do something different, get some water, and then I'll see you for the next talk. I think it's Marcel's talk, which I'm very excited about as well.